Would you be willing to step down if it meant saving Cuba? ¿Está dispuesto a dimitir con tal de salvar a Cuba, para la gente de Cuba, al pueblo de Cuba?
Tú que eres una periodista importante, reconocida.
Important and
If the United States asked,
journalist.
if the
Have
United
you ever
States
asked that
asked,
question to any other president in the world?
because it's one of the conditions the United States is asking for, would you ever consider that?
Let me explain. Have you asked that question to any other president
I
in the
asked
world?
very
Have you
tough
asked that question
questions
to
to
any
our
other
own
president in the
president,
world?
yes.
Se la podrías preguntar a Trump.
Could you ask
I
that question
asked
to Trump?
very hard questions of President Trump.
Eso muestra, ¿es una pregunta tuya o es una pregunta del departamento?
Is that a question from you, or is that coming from the State Department of the U.S.
My
government?
question is, because it's one of the things that we've heard the U.S. government talk about, that they want political change here in Cuba. So my question for you, if they asked you, if they said this is one condition, would you step down?
Because of your honesty, I'm going to assume that you're asking that question because of those reasons. In Cuba, the people who are in leadership position is not elected by the U.S. government, and they don't have a mandate from the U.S. government. We have a free sovereign state, a free state. We have self-determination and independence, and we are not subjected to the designs of the United States. On the other hand, Cuban leaders are not here representing an elite of power. You can see my background, where I was born, my family, what I've done throughout my life. We are elected by the people, although there's a narrative trying to disregard that. Any one of us, before we become part of a leadership role, we need to be elected at the grassroots level in an electoral district by thousands of Cubans. And then those who represent the Cubans at the National Assembly of the People's Power elect those leadership positions and those offices like it happens in many other countries around the world. So we have an election system on the basis of people's participation. So whenever we take this responsibility position and this leadership position, is not out of our personal ambition or a corporate ambition or even a party ambition. We do that as a mandate by the people. And the concept of revolutionaries giving up and stepping down is not part of our vocabulary. If the Cuban people understand that I'm not fit for office, that I am not I have no risen to the occasion, then and I should not be holding this position of president, I will respond to them. But you need to realize that you should not focus only on the president of the country, because we have a collegiate leadership which is very closely linked to the people. But it's not the United States that can impose anything on us. The U.S. government that has implemented that hostile policy against Cuba has no moral to demand anything from Cuba. They have no moral, not even to say that they are concerned about the situation of the Cuban people and that the Cuban government has taken Cuba to this situation when they have all this responsibility on their shoulders. I think the most important thing would be for them to understand and take this critical position, a sincere position, and that they recognize how much it has cost the Cuban people, what the policy that they have implemented in terms of what they've done, and how much they have deprived the American people from a normal relationship with the Cuban people, and that they set out, as we have requested and as we have asked and as we're interested in, to engage in dialogue and discuss any topic without any condition, not demanding changes from our political system, as we are not demanding changes from the American system, about which we have a number of doubts and a number of considerations, and that we can focus on what brings us together and what can create spaces of understanding in order to move away from confrontation and having a path forward for both countries of benefits of friendship and solidarity.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.